Okay, so we know this this red tape bill is actually taking away information that's already public. And there's no reason to take it away except to hide that information from the public and from researchers. It costs nothing to keep it where it is.
Nothing.
Nothing. So this is the opposite of red tape removal. It actually increases the labor of the ministry if they want to actually provide the information to anybody.
Yeah. It's just very eye-opening when the way it was snuck in so quietly, without announcement, and somebody had seen it, caught whiff of it, alerted me, and then alerted the public, as I do.
Yes.
When you look at the justifications provided for why they're doing this, taking down information that is already publicly available, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to resource it. You don't have to man it. You don't need any resources to, check one-to-one requests or to send information. It's there. You don't have to do anything. Right. It is such a lovely data set to have. Researchers use it, journalists use it often, family members use it very often when they're fielding, which home out of a variety of homes it might be in their neighborhood that they are, considering selecting. They go and look at the background. And the government, what they're trying to do now, what they will do in 22 days, is to effectively only keep 3 years at a time, ever.
Right.
And so as it stands right now, we will miss the first 2 years of the pandemic. That will all be wiped as soon as this comes into effect. And then in just a couple of years, the entire pandemic experience in long-term care will be wiped from the public record. Right. Which is incredibly troubling. But even that aside, the justifications they provide are twofold. One, they say that they want to make this similar to other inspection-based industries like childcare. Well, we know you cannot compare childcare where people are there on a daily basis. These are children that are not living in these facilities and certainly not dying in thousands, or didn't die in thousands during the pandemic. And it's not a sector plagued by abuse, negligence, premature death. I mean, we have so much evidence that this is a very unique sector of very vulnerable older adults that really begets a public record to be made public and to be kept public. So you cannot compare the two. Apples and oranges. It's a false equivalency, and it's just completely inappropriate. And the second justification is that the new reports, they don't want to keep old reports up because they're worried that that will give people the wrong impression as to their current compliance status. Well, the only way to know that is to compare the past to the present.
Exactly.
Listen, we're all about giving people pats on the back when they deserve it. But we cannot tell you, you've done great, you really improved, if we can't actually look back and see how much you've improved. So it is mind-blowing to me that they even pose that justification, which just falls so flat. I mean, it's just on the ground, very, very flat mess right there.
Yes.
Clean it up, somebody. Yes. And then they say, well, listen, we're not going to get rid of the reports. We will provide them if you need them on a one-to-one basis, which again is the antithesis of red tape reduction, because now you suddenly are going to have to put resources for staff to have to field these requests and the many requests that will come in. And furthermore, I personally don't have a lot of faith that these requests will actually be fielded, certainly in a timely manner. As I know for a fact, I have been emailing the ministry about inspection reports myself because I'm in the midst of a trend analysis with these reports. And there was some issues that I noticed and I had questions for. And I have alerted them both in email, through their website, and also through, social media. And I have not received a response since February. And I know other people who have also reached out, and it's been almost a year plus, and they haven't heard back at all from the ministry. So they're obviously already very time crunched, do not have the, bandwidth, or maybe are being told to take their time and not respond. I don't know, but either way, we're not getting the information that we're requesting as is. So how are we going to get it now going forward when you're opening up so much more demand and requests that'll be flooding into the ministry when they already have a lot of work to do?
Yes, they do.
More than enough work to do. So
and the information is already online. there's no need to take it down, none
No,
whatsoever.
no.
You observed when we were talking before also some interesting trends in terms of the kind of inspections that are done at different places, with some inspectors doing very thorough inspections,
Yeah.
others not so much.
Yeah. I mean, and this is part of the research process and part of what, the public can learn by having the full record. You can see how the inspections have changed over time. You can see differences, not only in the kinds of reports, the detail in those reports, what is being looked at and what is being addressed versus what isn't, what kind of penalties are allotted. Versus if you want to look at the different ownership types, you can do that. I mean, there's thousands of opportunities for different studies to come out of this, and many research studies have put out very important information doing trend analyses over time, but you can't do analysis over time with 3 years worth of data that constantly disappears because it's 3 years at that current time. I mean, this is a moving target we're chasing now with no ability to look back. And frankly, the best predictor, as they say, of future behavior is past behavior. So if you're not trying to hide past behavior, why not just keep them up?
Yeah, exactly.
Why not keep them up?
We also know that that the Ford government has gone ahead and given all of these institutions 30-year contracts in spite of in some cases very, very poor records. So, people have reason to want to look at those inspection reports and assess for themselves, for their own families.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, not for nothing, when you look at some of the providers who are currently being provided massive extensions to continue operating for another 25 to 30 years, like Orchard Villa and Southbridge. And that's a key example, right? Orchard Villa was if not the top mass casualty, one of the top 3 deaths throughout the pandemic in terms of residents who died from COVID. They were one of the military occupied homes. Yes. I know many of the families that lived through that nightmare, and they've been are part of, research that I've conducted, and I've heard their stories firsthand. It is awful what they went through. And think about how so offensive it is for them, many of which fought to get these reports published and public so they could have some form of accountability, to now know that they're all going to be wiped at the same time that this government is also rewarding these same people with massive contracts, and not only to continue going forward, but to expand. So the case of Southbridge is actually expanding and having they're going to be building an even bigger mega, mansion long-term care facility out in Pickering. So you really have to ask yourself who is benefiting from this particular policy. And as far as I can see, it is not the residents, it's not the public at large, it is the providers who don't want their record of noncompliance and abuse and just bad performance records to be kept public for people like me and like you and other journalists and other families to be able to look at and make their own informed decisions about how they feel about these providers.
Yeah. And you know what I also recall is that there are 6 outstanding class action suits against 6 of those companies.
And they were all for-profit companies that were part of the class action lawsuit. That's, not for nothing. And unfortunately, in Ontario, the vast majority of long-term care homes are for-profit. We have the highest share of for-profit long-term care ownership across the country. So, and that also explains why we had such disastrous outcomes during the pandemic. There is a clear correlation in the research, long-standing research, domestic and international, that shows that on the whole, for-profit fails to protect the residents. It fails to provide superior care. It fails the workers. They hire less workers. They pay their workers less. They don't provide the same number or as many direct hours of care per day per resident. There's higher rates of hospitalizations and premature mortality and illness and injury. I mean, the list goes on, and we have so much evidence to this.
Yes.
So you have to wonder why all of a sudden you would want to wipe out a record, a long-standing historical record here. 15 years effectively will be soon gone. Of serious abuse and noncompliance, and what it says about people who, various governments, not just this government, but all governments that have been in power and allowed this sector to just progressively get worse and worse. And I do believe it is getting worse. And I also believe that is part of the impetus for wanting to take the information down, because if you compared previously, you would see that probably it was better, right? Policies that have happened, policies under the Ford government have actually made this sector more vulnerable. And I'm very confident that would show up in the results going forward.
But it does seem that it's clear that who gains and who loses from this. And ultimately, it's the people living in the homes who lose if those on the outside are not able to track the information and hold them to account.
It lowers accountability. It obviously all but eliminates transparency. And it's dangerous, having these reports and having people that can use these reports to shed light on what is happening and how things are changing and troublesome new trends and patterns that you can't ascertain without comparing them to the past. It's deeply problematic, and it endangers everyone that has a vested interest in long-term care, apart from the owners of companies that profit from hiding this material and still being able to, draw in residents.
Yes. Chris, why don't you
go through, a brief history of the Ford conservatives and long-term care homes? Because, what I've seen in this is we had the pandemic. Ford said he was going to build an iron ring around the long-term care homes. Almost nothing was done. The armed forces were called in, wrote a scathing report about seniors dying of thirst, seniors dying, sitting in soiled diapers for days on end, just horrific conditions that they were under. And then Ford bringing in legislation to protect them from negligence lawsuits.
Bill 218.
Right, as much as he could. Yeah. And then also extending their contracts for 30 years.
Yeah.
And now they're deleting the records from that time. Is that a fair summary of
Well, it's actually worse than that, right? So we have all of that, which is already bad enough. But what a lot of people don't realize is that there's been many more regulations that have slipped under the radar that I have tried to draw attention to these with some success. But, you and I all know that as soon as the vaccine started, thankfully saving the lives of many of these residents, it didn't save from them having, the illness and contracting it, but it saved their lives. And when we stopped seeing the deaths, a lot of the media focus shifted, and that's just how, the media is, right? They go to where the emergency is of the day, and they thought, well, seniors aren't dying anymore in these homes, so everything's fine, but it's not fine. And what we've seen, especially in the last couple of years, which is really damaging, and I vehemently believe this is going to lead to massive preventable neglect and injury in the next few years. And I think it may be part of the reason why they want the previous record, the safer record, to be wiped. Things like in December, they created a regulation that would make permanent a alleged, pandemic emergency stopgap measure to get workers in these homes when everyone was getting sick and people were scared to work in long-term care, and that first year effectively. And they passed this, temporary resident care aid emergency measure. Said it's just an emergency, temporary stopgap measure. And I immediately, and I'm on record saying this, there's a story, if you check for it, in 2020 saying, this is what some people on the other side who protect certain interests have been lobbying for a while, to get another bottom tier of workers that they can exploit even more, because heaven forbid, apparently we pay our PSWs too much, right? So we need a new tier of workers who have even no credentials whatsoever. They can hire anyone at the discretion of the owner, the provider, anyone. And they've called them now resident support personnel. And we all saw firsthand what happens when you put people in the most vulnerable congregate care living situation without proper training or resources, how badly things can go. And of course, it's not to blame the workers. They were put in this situation by politicians and government officials who refused to dedicate the resources, provide paid sick leave, get people with actual healthcare training and, IPAC training and all of those things, certainly during the pandemic time. But now they've created this permanent regulation to allow long-term care providers, the majority of which are for-profit, whose main job, fiduciary responsibility, is to secure profits for their shareholders, to find a way to secure more profits by creating a new tier of workers they can pay even less, they can exploit even more. Because apparently these workers aren't already exploited enough. The vast majority of these racialized women, many of which are new to Canada, who work in these jobs for far less pay and training than they deserve. And there's already a revolving door because of that. This is very difficult, skilled work. And these women are already doing this for terrible pay and in terrible working conditions. And now they have passed this regulation December 2024 to make it even worse. And another regulation they passed very quietly over the past year was to allow now PSWs to administer some medications.
Right.
That used to only be at the prevail of nurses who are skilled and trained enough to understand, you know, the severity of what can happen if you, for example, give out a bad medication or you give out the wrong medication. And we have inspection reports. I can show you these very recent inspection reports that my research will talk about when that comes out, that literally shows medication errors, giving, you know, the wrong medication to residents, and then it led to hospitalization and death. I mean, this is what happens. And most people don't even realize that these regulations have slipped under the radar and have endangered and made this sector even more vulnerable than arguably ever before, that I've seen at least.
So what you're saying is the other thing that they've done is they found a way to actually increase profits by paying workers less, by having untrained workers looking after the seniors when they absolutely need training in order to be able to do the job and provide care to the seniors.
Absolutely. And I have been critical about this from day one.
Okay. Can we go back a little bit further too to how we got into this mess? Because there's a 2002 report from the Ontario Health Coalition that talks about, under the Harris Conservatives, for the first time, the government was using tax dollars to build for-profit long-term care homes.
Yeah, we never used to have for-profit long-term care homes, right? We were like hospitals. Long-term care was kind of treated largely like hospitals, nonprofit. And then Mike Harris came in and allocated, I think it was 20,000 beds, almost $1 billion, I believe, to overwhelmingly for-profit providers. And that one move and allowing them into this sector is what completely changed the landscape of long-term care in Ontario. Right. And it has been progressively worse since, right? And that's the other thing, right? Going back at least to 2010, which is just showing when things are really starting to get bad, thanks to Harris. And then you can start to see how it gets worse and worse, or better, based on different governments or different policies, right? And this is why having that longer record is so important, because you can contrast, let's say, I don't know, the Ford years with the Wynne years, and then you just go back as long as you can. We don't have the Harris years, but we have, 5 years after the Harris years, right, when things start to go really bad. So it's right. But you need that information, or else you can't do comparisons and contrasts and see how things can change.
One of the questions that people ask is, how do politicians get rich? So Harris uses tax dollars to build for-profit long-term care homes. He gets out of office, he becomes the director of Chartwell Homes. The last record that I saw said that he had made at least $7.3 million as the chair.
I mean, he has lots of shares in the company too, I believe, right? And then on top of it, he was the chair of the board. And in that, I think part-time advisory board, he was making more, almost $250,000. The last estimate I saw. So that's a pattern of 3 different conservative premiers who left office and went to sit on boards of for-profit long-term care companies. And
which other premiers? So
Ernie Eves, Mike Harris, and I'm drawing a blank with the third, but there is a third. I can find it for you.
So what you're saying is that they created this system of for-profit long-term care homes that treat seniors terribly, that have been exploiting seniors in order to maximize their profits. And each time it gets worse and worse. And this is the system that, is now being protected by eliminating some of the bad records.
There are policies that help protect residents and workers, and then there's policies and strategies that endanger them. And the hill I will always die on, and I've been very clear on this, is that I don't think profit has any place in long-term care. It has no place in care at all, period. At all. Anytime you privatize something out, you see the effects. I mean, there's longstanding evidence of how badly things can go when you start to privatize it out for the many, right? The majority suffer at the behest of a few getting very wealthy. And we have too much evidence to possibly store anywhere. Like there's evidence upon evidence, there's mountains of evidence. So if you keep choosing to put money into this system instead of saying, that's it, from here on forward, we need to follow the evidence and we need to only give money to nonprofit providers. That's step one. You have to do that. But instead, we're seeing, certain governments, like the Ford government, just reward and keep strengthening the stronghold of the for-profit industry in this sector. And once you give those contracts out, those are generational. Then they own the land at the end of the day. So effectively what they're doing is pretty much paying for the mortgages of these already very wealthy companies to secure massive real estate properties across Ontario. And then when the contract is done, they own that land, and then we're stuck. Because then if they want to buy us out or they want to charge us to, give that land back, you can imagine what's going to happen. And we're already seeing some of these providers decide, you know what, we're going to close the long-term care homes and we're going to demo them and build condos in this area instead. We're already seeing that. This is happening in Ontario.
We as taxpayers pay for the construction of a long-term care home. We pay the operating fees for decades.
We pay them. We give them we give them money per bed and development money too, to safeguard their facilities. And it's not a coincidence that during the pandemic, so many people died in the for-profit homes because they didn't eliminate their ward rooms, which they had many years to do that. And they were given many different rounds of public funding to upgrade their facilities to make them safer. And some homes did, and conveniently, many of the for-profits did not.
Right. And then in the end, these corporations that we've been funding own the property, close the long-term care home, and sell the property and make a profit off of the money that they got from us, from taxpayers. So this is just a scam that sacrifices seniors for profit and that rips off taxpayers. Is that a fair assessment of what we're talking about here?
It's my assessment. It's happening. It's happening. There are cases. You just have to look. Long-term care homes are closing down. These residents are being displaced, and now condos are going up in their place.
Wow.
Yeah.
And nobody's stopping it. So why are we giving contracts, generational contracts, to these people who have shown that they are not, or do not have a vested interest in doing what's in the best interest of these people who they are supposed to be serving, right? The residents.
So, when we're in the middle of government, you want to say, I think you're doing this in order to enrich yourself, but we can't say that. But what we can say is that the government of Mike Harris put things in place in order to enrich himself. We can say that. We have the evidence to that. Is that not?
I don't know the man's
corruption?
motivations, but if you just look at facts, right?
Yes.
The system was created. He left politics. He went into for-profit long-term care, and I'm sure other things. But I mean, you draw your own conclusions. You follow the money, is what people say. And I mean, if you can come to a different conclusion from that, by all means, tell me what it could be. But this is why people feel this way. And people are so angry about profit having such a stronghold in our long-term care sector, because we have so many instances of this kind of behavior, and nothing is changing.
How do we fight back? How do we, at this point, the system is so entrenched right now, and they're entrenching it more. How do we fight back? How do we fight for seniors so that they're not suffering in for-profit long-term care homes? And
I mean, you have to make noise.
Workers are struggling as well.
People have to make noise. People have to continue organizing. Workers have to be empowered also through added whistleblower protections and making sure that, they can speak up, because many workers feel like they can't because the way the sector is structured, which is why also family members and people like us do this for them when we can, because we know that they lose their jobs when they speak up often. I hear from workers all the time, right? So there's a real risk about whistleblowing without current protections, proper protections to protect these workers from losing their jobs. And then obviously families are often fearful of retaliation if they, make too many feathers. And some families have actually been served trespass orders for speaking up, at the home and demanding better support. So, I mean, there's so much that's being allowed to happen, and a lot of people don't realize it. I think the biggest thing is really informing the public that this is happening. And I think when people realize that, they have that moment of shock, like, is this is really happening? Like most people don't realize how long-term care is structured. And when they learn about this, then they get angry, then they mobilize, write your MPPs, demand that we move away from for-profit. I mean, I throw my hands up in the air sometimes too, because I've been trying for years now to really hit home how dangerous for-profit is. And you just feel like you're losing this battle when the consequence and the result is people's lives. These are people's lives. I mean, this is not for nothing, right? It's one thing if you want to go work at a coffee shop, you want to build a bunch of Tim Hortons, go do that. Fine. I don't care. Go in that industry. But these are people's lives. This is the end of their lives.
Yeah.
And we're allowing these operators whose main fiduciary responsibility is to secure profit to dominate. And we've seen what happens. We saw what happened in black and white during the pandemic. It was the worst mass casualty in our collective long-term care history. And now, to add insult to injury, the record will be wiped.
Yeah.
So this is, you just have to stop and say, who's benefiting here? What are we doing? We have to do better. This isn't okay.
On every basis, there's no justification for wiping out those records. And
I can't think of one.
No, and you've stated it again very clearly. Worst mass casualty in our history, and now we're wiping out those records. So we know the Trespass to Property Act is being abused to scare off, to keep family members when they away, sometimes for years at a time, when they raise issues of concern about their family members in long-term care. So we know that is happening a lot. And then in terms of staff, we know also that, you have a lot of new immigrant women, racialized women, often in these jobs, and now this even lower job that pays even less. And as we learned in our last conversation, most of the jobs are set up as part-time. So you have more employees, but more are part-time. And then you have, in many cases, you've also got people who are new to the country who are hoping to get their permanent residency status. And so they're going to be terrified to speak up because if they lose their job. We know this is happening. We know this is happening. They lose their job and often then they lose actually the right to even be here. Yeah,
it's sheer exploitation. And it keeps them quiet and it prevents them from speaking up when they know they want to, but feel like they can't for all of these reasons, which, I mean, and this is a sector we've allowed this to happen. And I mean, not for nothing during the pandemic, and I'll wrap with this, is that I even at one point, Rivera put out a report called The Perfect Storm. And towards the end of it, of course, I read it. They talked about how we need to keep bringing in people from other countries to work in long-term care. And it just screamed, because the working conditions are so bad that people don't want to work in long-term care. So let's just exploit people from other countries while we have them in this, many of them are refugees. We know this was happening during the pandemic. Refugees were being sent into these homes with no training. I've spoken to a couple of them and had disastrous consequences. Or new immigrants or people on these, temporary statuses. And then they feel like they're trapped. What can they do? Their hands are tied, right? And that's, it's like a captive work audience. You can't work and speak freely in that environment. But this is what we're doing because we refuse to bring up the quality of these jobs and these work arrangements to one that actually attracts everyone into this sector, right? It's kind of, a means to an end to then move on to other work. And that's why we see this revolving door. People don't want to stay in long-term care because the working conditions are so brutal and the work is so difficult and it's so under-resourced that people just leave. And then when you don't have, a continuous labor force, you have no continuity of care. You can't get to know your workers. Mistakes happen. You don't know what your residents need, allergies, medications. Mistakes happen. People die. It's not an oopsie, right? You need full-time permanent workers to be the vast majority of these workers, and you need to pay them well and give them continuous opportunities for learning and advancement. And we're just not doing that because apparently, caring for seniors and work that is predominantly done by women apparently doesn't deserve the same kind of safeguards and pay and training opportunities as other sectors, especially male-dominated ones. I mean, because not for nothing, this is a heavily gendered industry, and that cannot be left out of the discussion.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking that they are, in terms of information, getting out and being able to have accountability about what takes place. There are 3 strangleholds on information. And the one is the Abuse of the Trespass to Property Act that keeps families from being able to speak up, because it also frightens other people in the residence and other families from speaking out. We've got workers who are too afraid, systemically put in a position so that if they speak out, they lose their jobs and put
their status, yeah.
or their status. So it's a huge risk. And now they want to eliminate the public record, which exists now, but they'll get rid of that so that basically we're just all going to pretend that everything's perfect and great.
It's not good.
You know what, Vivian, thank you so much for your continued advocacy on this issue. What's happening is absolutely disgusting. It does not represent Canadian values. And I think you're right. I think the more that we get the word out about what's happening in long-term care home, about the exploitation of seniors for profit, the exploitation of vulnerable workers for profit, and the horrific conditions that seniors are suffering in, I think, the more chance we have of actually bringing an end to this, for-profit long-term care homes and restoring it to, a system where care is first rather than profit. So thank you for your advocacy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
everyone.